All right, Cian, welcome to the We Need to Talk podcast. You are my very first guest on the show, so I am very honored that you said yes and came on because you're one of my favorite people to talk to. But I want to introduce you quickly. Cian is a videographer and trainee therapist, psychotherapist.
Yep.
Yeah. Give the people a little bit about you. Tell me what you do, and then we'll frame into where this conversation is going to go today.
Okay. Yeah. Hi, everybody. Hi, Matt. Thanks very much for having me on as well. It's, always a pleasure. I love our conversations as well. And especially, to talk here as well is fantastic. So a little bit about myself. I guess I initially trained in graphic design, photography, that kind of stuff. And then when I was 23, I wound up with leukemia. I ended up having a bone marrow transplant in 2015. And so, January 2015, so that was just about 10 years ago now. And yeah, in the process of recovery, then I was self-employed, and I continue to be self-employed now for the last 10 years. About 3 years after my recovery, I ended up making a business decision that really drastically affected my mental health. I rented an office, and then I wound up actually in a kind of a depressed state, where I was having dark thoughts, and genuinely had very dark thoughts that at that point they were actually comforting to me. And so that's when a friend recommended that I reach out for a therapist. And so I've been working with my therapist, Tom, for the last 7 years. And I didn't start with Tom with the intention of studying counseling and psychotherapy. But then I realized, actually, as part of my video work, so I should have mentioned as well, I kind of pivoted more into videography, I'd say around 2017 or so. So I've been mainly a videographer since then. And so, I wanted then maybe to study some of the tools, because I really enjoy having deep conversations. I love capturing these moments. And at the same time, I didn't quite know how to handle, big conversations, or when people would share really, really big and intense things from their lives. I wasn't sure how to contain them. And so I wanted to learn the skills of psychotherapy. And then through the jigs and the reels, I've wound up really enjoying the process. And actually, so I've since started training in counseling and psychotherapy, and I started my master's last year, and I've also finished my training hours as well. And I guess we know each other because we've met on the Men Rising Together hikes, which are truly incredible. Men Rising Together, as you know, is a men's organization focusing on men's mental health and well-being. And I guess I've known David, who runs that organization. Well, David and Paddy run it, but I've known David since 2021. We were in a variety of different circles together. And they do fantastic work. And so I've been filming on men's work retreats for the last 3 years. And I guess that's where the dovetail of my interest comes in videography and psychotherapy, is that I've been a videographer for mental health and personal development for the last, I want to say, maybe 3 years or so. And I'm now realizing that that's really my niche, and that I love that kind of work, and it requires a specific sensitivity to consent. And I think as well, you've noticed that not only do I check with everybody on a retreat, but then afterwards, if there's anything that's going to go out publicly in a video or on camera, that I double check with the people that are in the video and see how they feel about these events being captured on camera and being shown to the public. So I think that's a little bit about me.
And I can also vouch for that last little bit, because at the retreat that me and Cian met, our MRT Scaffold Pike hike, which is incredible, and of everything I got from that, I'm very grateful to have met Cian. We've had a lot of great conversations since. He did how I would put best as the most delicate capturing of an uncomfortable situation for some people I've ever seen in terms of video capture. He was there. I knew he was there at the camera. Nobody knew he was there at the camera. He's doing his thing, and he's capturing the space in a way that's comfortable when you are going through the deepest parts of yourself during hard breath work. And then to top all that off, when all is said and done, he sends me the video first, even though I'd already told him and said, whatever you've recorded, I trust. You can put it out. But even so, he sends me to say, before this goes out to Dave and Paddy and goes out to the world, this is to be approved because you're speaking in it and you're going through difficulty. And I watched it, and I'm like, it's nearly as exactly what I pictured you would have held it as. was a beautiful glimpse into what we were all going through, and a little capture of the thoughts from me and a couple of the other men that were on the retreat. So thank you for how you captured it, and thank you for showing it to me when I was like, I've got trust. You can put out what you're going to put out. So a lot of times when somebody asks me about what you do in terms of videography, because I've got some different things coming up where I'm looking to hold space for some men, and I'm like, I would like to capture some of it. And they're like, how will that work? And I'm like, listen, I've got a guy. He's not going to interrupt it. You're not going to feel uncomfortable. And I think you're only able to do all of that so well, partially because I feel it's just who you are. But that journey you've gone through learning about therapy and counseling and going through that makes you, in my mind, a one of one when it comes to video projects. Because you're able to do that asking for consent and holding it in a magical way.
Thank you very much. And it's my pleasure. And that's the thing. I want to speak to the fact that, like, actually, it's a huge privilege to even be able to enter those spaces, let alone to be able to enter with a camera, right? Because they are very vulnerable spaces. What immediately comes up is, oh no, a fear that could come up, is like, oh no, that's it. I'm going to be on the front page of Instagram, crying my eyes out. My friends are going to be laughing at me. All this kind of stuff. All of those fears can come up, right? Like when people see a camera come into the space, I accept like the worst possible projections, that people could have, and that I'm here to, almost like, and I want to use this word, because it has kind of come up at times in different ways, but almost like in a predatory fashion, that I'm here to take, from people's experience and, to put it out there. And that is, it's not the case, because like for me, and I'm sure maybe you feel like a resonance with this too. This isn't just like an activity or a job or whatever. There is a mission like attached to this, right? That like where, we live in a world where, men are suffering, right? Men are dying. Men take their lives, at a disproportionate percentage compared to women. Men are living through loneliness. They're living through mental health. People say, oh, just ask for help, as if suddenly, the moment you ask for help, that's it, all your problems are solved. Actually, usually when things go bad, it's the 7th or 8th time that they've asked for help. Their hope is gone, all of those kinds of things. So I guess, you and I navigate spaces where we can show that there's actually a different world. There is a world where, people can come, be held, be safe, talk about their experience, talk about all the difficult things that have happened in their lives, and have them be met in a non-judgmental space. And then on video, like on camera, that's what I'm seeking to do, where, that like vulnerability, right? Like, again, vulnerability is a very big word and can mean a lot of different things. But in my opinion, vulnerability can be strength. It's not always strength. Sometimes if people are in a vulnerable situation and they don't feel safe, and then that's what gets transmitted, it's very dangerous. And for sure, like, the last thing that I would want is for someone to feel as if they're exposed, in a space like this. What I try and make clear as well to people is like, they're actually the ones that are in control, right? Like if they don't want to be on camera, and I come in at the start and I will dictate, there's actually like 3 levels usually. First level is like, look, if you don't want to be on camera at all, just let me know. Like, and I'll make sure that you're not in any of the footage. And sometimes, that might mean if I'm in the space and accidentally, my camera crosses where you are, or you're in a moment and you happen to see the camera, just to be sure that, like, just because the camera is there and maybe it's on, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're being recorded. And then even if there is a recording of you, I will make sure that it's not in the final outcome at all. Then level 2 is like if you're in the background. So if you're out of focus, maybe it's like just your hands, maybe it's the back of your head. And that's the thing, because some people are happy to be, part of it, but maybe not identifiable on camera, which again makes perfect sense. Maybe you're a primary school teacher, maybe you're a nurse or something like that. And it's just simply not appropriate for you to be identifiable on camera. Like you might have your students, or you might have someone who, and even though the context is good, the work that we're doing is great, like people might take it out of context, or they might, I don't know, like, so for whatever reason. And I also don't need a reason, or don't need justification. I don't need someone to say, well, because of this, I'm asking for that. It's like, no. Like, you're asking for this 100%. That's it. And then level 1 is like, I'm happy to be on camera. I'm happy to be identifiable. And that's usually for people that are either assistants or they're into the work themselves, or they're facilitating in that field, and they want to be visible. Because, like, say someone like myself at this point, I'm fine to be on camera in floods of tears. I'm fine to be on camera having an emotional release, having anger, having pain or sadness. Not only because I believe like that it's very important for me to process these things, but it's also important for an image of me being vulnerable, to be okay to go out there on social media. I've often had moments of processes myself where actually at this point I now wish they were on camera so that I had a memory of that. And actually I've been in spaces, say at the Sacred Sons retreat, for example, where you might have an assisting team of like 10 or 20 people, and people are actually coming up to me and they're looking for the footage of them where they're crying on camera or something like that, because that they want to be able to show like, look, I can model this as behavior. And at the same time, you know, there's a whole thing is like, not everyone needs to be crying on camera all the time. I'm sure, you know, you've seen the videos that I do. The last thing that I want is to create something, you know, that's exposing as if like emotional processes are all that the work is about. But actually it's like it's in the small things. It's the small moments, you know, the moments of camaraderie, the moments of connection. Like it's not the big things that matter. It's the little things. So anyway, there we go. Yeah. I wanted to just state that piece about recording this.
Even in that relatively short cut of like 3 minutes from that event, you see that magic of people going through the process. Like a really clear image of me when I'm hand on my belly, hand on my chest, going through it with some breath, and there's emotion on my face. But then quite quickly it cuts to all of us on top of the mountain holding each other and smiling, and the wind and the fun, and it really does show the depth, but also the enjoyment that can come out of the process. And I think the importance of documenting it the way that you do, there's medicine in just watching the video. And it's something we talk a lot about in these spaces. The conversation is the medicine more than the ayahuasca or the any of the stuff, depending what space you're at. The conversation could be medicine, but people seeing the possibility for showing up to one of these spaces is its own little microdose of medicine. To see it and go, that might be for me.
Yeah, recently I showed it to a female friend of mine. She's burst into tears straight away. Just like, she'd never seen men expressing themselves that way. She'd never seen men talking about their feelings, or men wanting to do that kind of work. And as well as that, I'm sure you feel this too, but it's an incredible privilege just to be able to do this kind of work, right? To be able to take the time, to have the resources. Like, thankfully, you know, I mean, at times, you know, I'm paid, I guess, you know, to be able to participate and then produce this kind of work. But for others participating and for others that invest in this, like, it is a very rare opportunity, you know, and it is so worth it. You know, I mean, an event like that could be 600 quid or something like that for the weekend. And some people will spend, you know, 600 quid in a month on alcohol. And that's a lot of people. Like if people like look closely at their budgets, you know. So and yet the investment in something like that can have a lifelong positive impact, whereas that amount of alcohol could perceivably have a negative impact, you know. So yeah, it's a choice, you know, and it's not a choice that everybody makes, but it's a very special choice. And so then for the people that make that, yeah, to have to show that it's possible, and then to have something to look back on afterwards, I think is incredibly valuable.
100%. And for me, I will look back at that video once or twice a week as a little reminder of the feelings I went through over that. And obviously, from the perspective right now, speaking on camera, and we're about to put this out to the world when it's done, I have a great belief that showing my own journey might be what somebody else uses as a reason to start their own journey of healing. So a lot of magic in what you do with that side of your work. I would like to pivot the conversation a little bit before we go into the depths of what I think is the biggest part of this conversation around your psychotherapy or training to be psychotherapist side of your work, because I also think you make a huge impact there, at least personally to me in my experience, because I've done 2 sessions with Cian now and I've had huge breakthroughs in it. So can you frame a little bit of what it's been as a journey getting into doing that?
Yeah, and thank you very much, Matt. And yeah, for a start as well, I want to say that like I've currently deferred the second year of my master's. So I started the first year of my master's before I did a HDIP. I started in 2022. I did a HDIP in DBS in counselling and psychotherapy, and then in 2024 joined the masters at IICP for pluralistic counselling and psychotherapy. And I finished my 120 training hours. And so currently as well, like I'm on a break essentially, and yet I'm still able to do coaching hours as part of my own personal practice. And in my coaching hours, I sometimes use skills that are transferable from counseling and psychotherapy, but I make it very clear that it is a coaching session. And so, how did my journey start? As I said, so I have had a background in video, and then I've also made videos with asylum seekers. I've made videos, and that was for the National Gallery, actually. That project was exhibited in 2020. And then I've also just gone on to interview people. I love talking to people, and I love listening to people, and I love just even like random conversations, on trains or planes, or like I'll start up conversations anywhere. And I also think for a long time for myself, like because of my experience of cancer, like I wasn't quite able to talk to other people without bringing up my cancer. And at the same time, like it's a very nuanced thing, because like when I would discuss my own experience, people would then feel comfortable or feel safe to share their experience. And so but then that could be overwhelming actually for me, because someone could share about a dark experience of theirs, and I wouldn't know really maybe what to do with it or how to contain it. And at the same time, I also really enjoyed those conversations, and I really wanted to be able to have those conversations in a way where like I was protected, the other person was protected, and we were having like a safe and productive conversation. And maybe even like working towards capturing some of that. And so initially when I started studying counseling and psychotherapy, it was genuinely only to really augment my videography skills, because I saw myself making more videos around maybe more vulnerable topics. Again, I had started in retreat spaces. Like in 2019, I participated in a psychedelic retreat actually abroad. And then COVID hit. So then in 2020, all my work slid off the face of the planet. So and actually again, to rewind, in 2019, I was traveling all over Europe. I actually wound up in Tokyo as well at one point for work. My flights were paid, accommodation in Ginza, and a nice little 1,500 quid fee on top for doing, I think it was like 2 days filming work in Tokyo. I was living a type of life that I did not think was possible, like before getting sick. Like when I got sick in 2014, could I have thought, like, I remember the first time that I went working abroad as a self-employed person in 2017, getting on a British Airways flight that was paid for over to London to stay in a 5-star hotel to film at some tech event. And I was like, what the hell is going on? And then 2019, to be at that level and to be flying around the world. And I was doing quite well in my video work. And then in 2020, everything slid off the face of the planet. And I was really left spinning. I was like, what the hell is going on? And why am I doing this? And it brought up a lot of questions for me. So at the time I guess I wanted some kind of focus as well. Like the mad thing is, like, actually in the end in 2020, I was only down 10% my income on 2019. But also since the office incident, like in 2018, that kind of drove me into depression. It definitely deprioritized money for me. I prioritized my happiness actually from there. So I knew that I was working towards my happiness. I knew that I was working towards like having these really interesting conversations. And so I was like, okay, like while it might make sense maybe to try and, pursue making more money or whatever, actually what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to pursue studying counseling and psychotherapy, which at the time, like while it didn't make sense maybe financially for me in terms of my own life and my own happiness and my mission and where it's led me to now and where it's led us to meeting, like that wouldn't have happened if I didn't make that decision.
Well, I think you made a good decision to jump into it, because I've had positive benefits from it. But I also think over the course of your career as it blossoms and grows, it's going to make a huge impact to the world. So for the uncomfort that the lack of work in 2020 brought you, that maybe led you to go, do you know what? I think it's time to prioritize this. I'm thankful to whatever it is that drove that to happen from a higher source or from within or wherever it came.
Well, I can be more specific actually on that one. Where
lay it on.
I went to Peru in 2022 and I drank ayahuasca there. And because at the time I still wasn't sure. I wasn't sure. I was like, what am I doing? Like, what is my purpose here? You know? And actually the answer that came back from that, the first night of ayahuasca was transformation, actually. And I was like, oh, okay. All right. That makes a lot of sense. I was like, right, I guess I can, just gear my life towards transformation, like in some way, shape or form. And I think, transformation and transformative work, which is actually basically the work that I've wound up being documenting, like in retreat spaces, is, I guess people don't maybe believe, right? People believe that like, oh, I've been traumatized by an event, and so therefore that's going to shape me for the rest of my life in a negative way. And while that is a belief, that could be true or could be seen to be true, maybe from certain perspectives, it is also possible to experience what's called post-traumatic growth. So it's like going through a traumatic event. And while it's possible to have post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic growth at the same time, so PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, say for myself, actually with my cancer, for example, like I had recurring pains in my body. So I had initially when the cancer presented, it was tumors in my hips. And so I actually had a lot of pain in my hips. I didn't even really know what was going on. And I've also had bone marrow biopsies. So my hip bones were actually quite damaged. And so even years after recovering, when the temperature changed or if I was out for a walk for a very long time, like a hike or something like that, I would actually have pain in my bones. And then like that would often end up lingering maybe sometimes for weeks or for months, because initially I would be like, right, I've got pain in my bones, probably not cancer. But then like weeks or months would go by and I'm like, ooh, am I sure it's not cancer? And then eventually I would call up my team at St. James's and I'd be like, guys, listen, I'm almost 100% sure that this is a scare. And they were actually amazing. And I really want to shout out to the hematology department in St. James's, because they would just say, look, just come in. Just come in, have a blood test, see how you're doing. And I would do that. Blood test would come back clear. Like it'd be totally fine. But I still had all of those thoughts and fears. So I didn't realize for a very long time that like actually that's a form of flashback. So, and I thought that a flashback had to be a visual, right? Like, oh, I am having this memory of this thing. A flashback can also be a sensation in the body. And that's what I was experiencing. The sensation that I was experiencing in my body brought me right back to 2014, brought me right back to 2015, actually 2016 as well. I relapsed after my bone marrow transplant. But that like, where did I start on that? It was more just, like
the ayahuasca showing you where to go with the
just transformative work, right? Like and this also leads into spirituality, which is I know something that you're very passionate about as well. But for me, like the feeling that I have now that I don't have pain in those places, and now that I don't experience those fears of recurrence, and genuinely, like I almost didn't believe that would be possible. I accepted at a certain point. I was like, right, well, like look, maybe I can deal with these fears if and when they come up. I simply haven't had pain in my hips in the last 3 years or so. And the gratitude that I have for that, it's just like, oh my God. And I ran 5 kilometers the other day for the first time in my life. And like, as I was running, I was almost in tears because I was like, holy God, I couldn't believe that it was happening, So yeah.
You're able to
guess that's
physically run without pain in your hips.
Oh, what a blessing. Like just, people don't know how good that feels until it's taken away. Unfortunately, we take a lot of things for granted. And so, that's, just some stories, I guess, in context as to, transformational work. And now, so I get to film in retreat environments where people are participating in different kinds of transformational work, be it men's work, somatic therapy modalities. I've also participated and filmed at conscious sexuality events as well. Like again, that's highly transformative work, and especially as you know, like we live in Irish society, we come from very traumatized, repressed Catholic sexuality, and all of those things are very important, in my opinion, to look into. Because they dictate how we lead our lives as well, and how maybe we might be hiding parts of ourselves or maybe not living, to our fullest extent. And what do we really want? What do we desire? And do we go towards that or are we afraid of it? So, yeah.
Definitely a space I would like to speak to you about more, maybe in another episode, is those sexual retreat spaces, and how I've never experienced them, but I would imagine a lot of the transformative work that you do inside a space like that doesn't end at the bedroom. As you say, it's part of how we lead our lives. Because
No,
if
it's
you're
everything.
repressing something there, you're probably repressing things outward, and as you navigate your career and your interactions with friends and family.
100%. Like even dynamics in the workplace as well. You know, consent. Consent is everything. And actually, that's one thing. For example, like so, my work filming in retreats really took off when I developed a better understanding of consent. And essentially, my intention or my goal is to actually empower the participants. Like the video work isn't about me. It's about, you know, what participants are willing and capable of showing, and yeah, so trusting them, and for them to be able to trust me means coming to like an agreement around consent. So yeah, it's fascinating work. There's Betty Martin is her name. She has a book called The Art of Giving and Receiving, and yeah, there's these like kind of 4 states of like giving, taking, allowing, and accepting. And again, I could get into that in a big way. But let's just say that like consent applies to literally everything, from workplace to, as I mentioned, kind of family stuff. Like, oh, who's going to look after this person? Or, oh, you know, like I've been, you know, taking on a lot of this and that. And all of those things are very relevant there. So yeah, a friend of mine did ask me, oh, did you learn anything that applies in a non-sexual context? And I was like, no, everything applies in non-sexual contexts. Yeah.
And I will say, in my own personal but also professional life, in the few conversations we've had around consent and even interactions for how you were part of holding the space at the retreat, I don't think I've told you this, but you've made a positive impact to how I interact with clients in person. Because you've experienced this once when we were in the gym together. I'm very touchy-feely when it comes to exercise. When I'm showing somebody how to move, unconsciously, I will put a hand on somebody's back to say, you're supposed to lean into here. Since our interactions, it's not a complete default yet, but it's getting there, where before I put my hand on somebody's shoulder, I'm saying, I'm just going to touch you here. Is that okay? And that's such a small thing in my PT space because none of us do it. But you showed me the value of how important it can be for making somebody relax into the space. Because in the recent 2-3 months, I've had a lot of people who are new to training who maybe don't know PT's going to put his hand on my shoulder, or PT's going to put his hand on my arm to go, do you feel that?
Yeah, it's interesting. And like actually what that brings up for me as well is the experience of being in yoga classes as well, where people do these kind of adjustments or whatever. And it's like, whoa, God, you know, I mean, is you know, you can tell me first, or you can ask for my permission first. Like, I mean, yeah, if you don't like my posture, I just remember being in Peru actually years ago, and we had just done like a kirtan yoga, which is us singing. And then, you know, we were all getting ready for a photo afterwards. And I was probably a little bit hunched over or something like that. But this lady reached over to me, and we hadn't had a conversation, or we hadn't even had a word, you know, the entire time we were there. The first interaction we had was she straightened my back, you know, so that I could be on. And I was like, excuse me, like, is my like hunched posture making you uncomfortable to the point where you need to correct my posture? Like, or is this actually for my benefit, you know? So anyway, it's always an interesting conversation. It can definitely be very disempowering actually if someone is making adjustments you know, without checking in beforehand. And all this to say as well is like, look, like I'm also human, like, and people do make mistakes, and it's also totally fine. And so just to have some kind of conversation around that, if and when it happens, like, can actually be very healing, can be very humbling for the person who made the mistake, and then can be very empowering actually for the person who is correcting the person who made the mistake. So yeah, it's a whole thing. I don't put myself out there as a paragon of virtue. I'm human. I make mistakes as well. And yeah, you know, it's a very tricky area. However, it's definitely, in my opinion, always better to have a conversation around it than not to have a conversation around it. So yeah, it's important. And
it's not the space to ask for forgiveness instead of permission. It's quite the opposite.
No, 100%, 100%. So yeah. And at the same time, there's a whole conversation as well to be had around safer spaces as well. Like there is, it's very tricky, but like providing a completely safe space is very difficult, if not impossible. And so then the preparation can be, okay, here's what happens, if there is a mistake, or being human, being flawed, being imperfect, that we are and that we can be. So yeah, it's important to have space for those conversations as well. Repair conversations. And that's actually something that I recently kind of really begun to understand a lot better is, that like once a mistake has happened, because as I said, like, so for me, it's one of my kind of core tenets, like being human means making mistakes, not being perfect and being flawed. And so then if that's going to be the case, what does the repair process look like? And that's also very important.
Huge, because we are human, and there's not a person out there, even if we go biblical on it, people like to say Jesus never made any mistakes. I'm sure he did in his real life. Everybody makes mistakes. The difference with having integrity and a moral code is around being able to acknowledge when you've made those mistakes and make amends. And that structure is extremely important. We all need to continually learn to get better. So I definitely will dig deeper on that conversation with you to learn more from what you've learned on repairing when you've made a mistake.
Yeah. And actually, it's interesting. I was thinking about Jesus recently because, like, I was feeling like, he kind of went viral, because, like, we don't hear much about Jesus up until he's 30. And then we hear about like the 2 to 3 years of Jesus' life before he's crucified. So like, he kind of comes out of nowhere, bam, millions of views. And then, on the crucifix. And then also all of his disciples as well were also horribly like tortured and crucified as well. We don't hear about them, just hear about Jesus. So, it's like, it can happen to all of them, but Jesus gets the clout. And I'm not, by the way, like, I mean, Jesus would totally understand. But I like that frame as well, that like, he very much was a human being too. And, there's I'm sure there's parts of the story that we don't always hear. And that the life, before he hit 30, I'm sure, he probably made a bunch of mistakes. And at the same time, like, I absolutely love his message, love his presence, and love everything about it. And him. And actually, there's a story. It's in The Chosen. Have you come across The Chosen?
Is it the new TV series featuring Jesus?
Yeah, it's a TV series about the life of Jesus. And at one point, so he has a disciple called Little James. Little James is crippled. He can't walk properly. He doesn't talk confidently. And at one point, he goes up to Jesus. He's like, "Hey, Jesus, like, the way you can like heal people like with a wave of your hand?" And Jesus is like, yeah. And little James is like, "Well, how come you haven't healed me?" And like, when I heard that straight away for the first time, like, I just burst into tears, because for me, like, that was that feeling, right? It's like, well, even initially when I got sick, I was like, why did God do this to me? Right. And so I had that kind of real kind of conflict for a long time in my life, where I was like trying to figure out, like, how does this make sense? But then, when I heard that this part with little James, and so then Jesus is like, look, like, I could heal you, but hundreds or thousands of people already have that story, right? Like, the more powerful story is, because like, he's met these people, they've traveled far and wide, they come to him, he heals them. Fantastic. He, like, cures the blind. The leper actually is also one of my favorites. He's out with his buddies and they see a leper and everyone's like, "Oh my God, run away, run away." And Jesus is like, "No, guys, like, don't worry." And he goes over to the leper, gives the leper a hug, and straight away, leper is cured. And for me, again, that story speaks to seeing something that other people might view as disgusting or unsafe or unkind or something like that, and moving towards it, showing that safety, showing that kindness. And wow, what a transformative effect that can have on it. But so with this story with little James, he's like, look, like, I could heal you, if I wanted to. But the more powerful story is that you don't need to meet me to be healed. Like, that actually you will be healed in time in the kingdom of God, when we die, when we pass away. And the more powerful story is that it's okay it's okay to live like just the way you're living, and that you will be healed in time. And again, I was like, oh, wow, that really radically altered, my own perspective on waiting to be healed before I could do these amazing things, right? As in before I could go and live my life fully. Because for a long time, trust me when I say I did not feel healed. And now, thankfully, and again, very, very grateful and with full humility, I do feel healed. I do feel cured. But it is a very difficult conversation. And I certainly wouldn't tell anyone, oh, here's my interpretation of your illness or the state of your body. Yeah.
Which I think only when you've gone through the difficulty of what you went through can you have that perspective and understanding. Because I want to hold my hands up in radical honesty of our first interaction of an actual conversation on this retreat as to the moment where I'm like, this man's going to be a good friend to me because he's after pushing me in a way I didn't expect. When we first sat down to have a conversation at the table in Manchester, what's the story? I haven't talked to you yet. Let's get to know each other. Cian started telling me about his life, and part of your life and your journey is your time working through having cancer. And the way I led myself in that conversation was not great, because my instant thing was to relate to somebody that I know. I said, I know somebody that's going through this, and you caught me right by the short and curlies in that moment and went, how do you think this makes me feel to be opened up and tell you about this, and now you're relating to this? And you gave a really interesting framing that maybe you want to talk about on it as to a comparison.
As I said earlier, I think I'm not 100% sure that I recall everything from this conversation, but it does. I mean, it certainly sounds like something I would say. I don't have a super clear recollection of it, but I guess like the framing that you're looking for, let me see. Because and I think, I would only say that as well to someone, who's working as a coach, to someone who's working with men, or who's working with potentially, people that might have cancer or going through cancer or something like that. So I came at it from that perspective. Like, I don't think I would just pull anyone up on something like that. I felt safe to do that, right? I felt safe in whatever way we were talking already in the conversation. I knew that like I could possibly land, just like some of my own experience, right? And be real and be authentic. I could either hide how I was feeling about that, or I could be honest with you. But the specific frame eludes me. I'm not sure. Maybe if you give me the little pointer. It was
around if you were somebody who was telling me
wait a second. Now I remember. Okay. Yeah. You're right. So at times, and again, like it's tricky stuff, because essentially what you're talking to somebody about at times is a traumatic experience. And also it is interesting because everybody's experience of different things are different. So apparently cancer isn't always traumatic, but for me, it was definitely quite traumatic. It took up years of my life. It took me years to recover from. But some people, maybe they have a short surgery or a short bout of chemotherapy. It's over. They don't want to think about it. That is totally fine. Like, I am not telling people like, oh, you have to find the meaning in this, you have to dig into it or whatever. But I think the analogy that I gave to you to bring it home, no, in fact, I know the analogy that I gave to you to bring it home, was the idea that like, if I had been sexually assaulted, like that if you had a friend who had been sexually assaulted and you told me, like, it's not comparable. Like, as in the experience, like, just because like, someone who is going through an experience of cancer does not mean that like, anything about my experience or that the experiences are comparable. I'm sure they probably have like some points in common, in the same way that like, sexual assault might have some of the same impacts on people. But traumatic experiences affect people in different ways. And I think, again, I was more using it as something maybe to kind of make a point or to shock, to kind of bring it home.
And it worked, because it gave me a clear frame on, oh, I see how I could have made Cian feel in this moment.
Yeah, I think, again, it's a whole thing, right? And I'm sure, people talk about I'm going to use the words the victim narrative, right, the whole time. That like, there's a big difference between having a story and identifying with a story, right? Like, I have had an experience of cancer, and actually for quite a long time, like in my 20s, I was like, I'm a survivor. I'm just going to keep going, I'm going to beat this, I can fight this. And then when I relapsed as well, I actually gave up completely. Like I was like, okay, maybe these are the last 2 or 3 months of my life. Because at this point, like this was my second relapse. I like relapsing after a bone marrow transplant. I relapsed with what's called a myeloid sarcoma. So I had chronic myeloid leukemia and blast crisis. I had a bone marrow transplant, and then I relapsed after I actually also relapsed before my bone marrow transplant because my donor was delayed. So I went through all this chemotherapy, BLAG-IDA, all the rest. So like rescue chemotherapy. Had my bone marrow transplant, and I think it was like a year and a half later, I relapsed. And at that point, I was like, okay, either I'm probably going to need a second bone marrow transplant, and so I really wasn't sure what was going to happen at that point in my life. And as I said, I relapsed with this, it's called a myeloid sarcoma. So I put in like myeloid sarcoma, relapse, bone marrow transplant.
This is all the Googling.
Yeah. And I found one guy, I think he was a man, who died 6 months after he was diagnosed with this relapse after bone marrow transplant. And at that point, I genuinely thought that I had 6 months to live. And I went home, I went to my parents and I was like, by the way, guys, like, this might be the best 2 or 3 months of my life before, like, they were going to take me off the corticosteroids that I was on. So my graft versus host disease was going to come back. And they were going to put me on this new medication, which was similar to another medication that I had been on before, which could also have like, health impacts as well. And, they were going to see, and then I was also going to have targeted radiation on my hip. And they were going to see how that was going to go. But say if that wasn't effective, I'd probably be looking at either another bone marrow transplant or more chemotherapy or whatever. My life was not looking that great at that point in my life. I gave up going back to work entirely. I started being self-employed in 2015. And actually I had moved out of home. I was renting accommodation from June 2015 to, I think it was like December 2015, where again, like this pain in my hips was coming back. I couldn't, it would freak me out, really freak me out. I ended up moving back home, and then, I think it was like 4 or 5 months later, discovered. And actually, it was a whole thing. Anyway, I thought that I had this other condition called avascular necrosis, and I could get into that. But yeah, so I thought that I was going to die, and then for whatever reason, the new medication, dasatinib, like that's it. It worked. It worked against the graft versus host disease. Like my cancer went away. I did have the radiation. I actually ended up I rented accommodation next to St. James's and stayed there for a month. And again, I paid up for all of this out of my own pocket. I mean, I love my parents. They were not in the position at the time to basically be able to financially support me in any way. So yeah, that was my own journey. But yeah, and I had the radiation, as I said. I was put on the medication, and then suddenly my health just started coming back. And I really couldn't believe it. And because I had given up the whole time when I was sick, I was like, right, well, either I'm going to die or I'm going to get back to work. And I really wanted to get back to work. I really identified, with myself as like being someone who was good at my job. And yeah, then when 2016 came, I was like, okay, fine, maybe I'll never get back to work. And this is as good as my life gets. And then I started getting better, and again, maybe people can derive, different interpretations of that experience for me. In the end, I'm just very grateful. I'm very grateful to have survived. Again, people say, oh, you're this very positive person. Like, no wonder that contributed towards your survival. I've also met plenty of very positive people that have died from cancer, so it's a whole thing. And I guess all of this to say that, like, for a long time, I didn't see myself as a victim. I saw myself as a survivor. And then it was only really in 2020 when I realized, like, wait a second, like, what happened to me was really unfair. Like, a lot of people in their 20s don't spend most of their 20s in hospital, most of their 20s essentially being physically disabled. And at the same time as well, like, actually, it was in a men's retreat, funny enough, with Sacred Sons, that I had this moment, where I got they do lots of kind of play fighting exercises.
And sacred combat, as they call it, and all of that.
Yeah, and at one point, like, you have to hold on to your leg and just hop around and like try and push the other guy off balance. And in the process of holding onto my leg, the skin of my lower leg is very fragile, and it got torn essentially. And I knew that like, there's a high chance of infection, all this kind of stuff. I was like, and it really got me down. It really like brought me down, because I was like, God, I can't even just play around. I can't even mess around with these guys without having to worry about it, on these infections. Like, as in, I just want to play around, you know? Why can't I do that? And at the same time, like, someone else actually kind of projected this like victim narrative onto me, you know, that they were like, oh, you know, you shouldn't complain about this thing or whatever. But like, actually, it was important for me in that moment just to acknowledge it, right? Like, just to kind of name it.
Not to sit in it and let it take you over, but just to acknowledge that feeling and what you're experiencing.
And which is difficult for men, right? Like, as in the normal masculine thing is like, don't talk about it, let's move on, you know. But push it down, yeah. Whereas for me, this could be controversial as well to say, I'm a big believer in feeling sorry for yourself, right? Because when normally the natural response is from people, it's like, stop feeling sorry for yourself, or don't feel sorry for yourself. And in both of those senses is stop feeling or don't feel. And actually, I think it is important actually to feel for a moment, and then feel all of the other feelings as well, and to not identify with that feeling, to not identify with like, oh, well, this is what happens and this is what it means to me. But yeah, it's a whole thing. There's another a therapeutic diagram called the victim triangle, or the drama triangle. And yeah, like there's a victim, there's a rescuer, there's a perpetrator. And once upon a time as well. We
discussed that recently.
Yeah.
I can picture it.
For sure, for a long time, I actually identified as the rescuer. I was like, I'm helping or fixing like other people, but actually that disempowers people. And I wasn't seeing my own victim narrative as well that was playing out. And then more recently, actually, I started becoming more okay with being the perpetrator, being the bad guy in some people's story. Whereas, you know, it's impossible basically to be this good guy all the time as well. So yeah, I don't know. I think I started talking about the victim narrative, but and it's just, it's so nuanced and complex. There's all these parts of it, and essentially, it's okay that something bad happened. In fact, it's kind of shit, right? And it's unfair, and life is unfair, and life is painful, and it's difficult. And now, what you want to do? You know, okay, so like, you know, acknowledging all of that, like, sure, that's the way it is. Yes, all your feelings are valid, and now what, right? Like, so, you know, do you want to stay in that? Or do you want to, you know, what you want to do, right? You want to be a creator? You want to create things? Let's go. You know, you can create literally anything from here. There's a sentence that I came across, actually, it's in a podcast that I sent you with this guy, Cian Brennan. And he says, it's a sentence for people that have been in addiction. And it says, shame on them, right, for treating me the way that they did. And shame on me for staying the same, right? And I can actually now apply that, you know, say even to my cancer or whatever. It's like, shame on my cancer, you know, for treating me the way that it did, but shame on me for staying the same, you know. And also, that's not to weaponize shame or whatever, but anyway, it just felt like
it's to use the shame as a tool instead of just allowing it to take you over and become who you are.
Exactly.
It's to alchemize those feelings, to use some more esoteric words, into something more powerful.
Transformation.
Exactly what do they call ayahuasca? She's the grandmother, or she the mother?
Yeah, well, the vine of death. I mean, that's
yeah. The vine of death is coming at you with the tools and the direction that you need to see, and you
that's the thing. It's like
so literally,
like death is part of life, right? Like, as in, it's a cycle. You know, that's why I have this little the Ouroboros symbol as well on my arm, is because life is full of these cycles, right? Death and rebirth, you know. And that's the thing, just because it's the death of something, like, doesn't mean it's the end. In fact, it could be the birth of something new, you know. So it's important not to think of death as this bad thing, in my opinion. It's like, death, yeah, sure, it's a final thing. It's the end of any cycle. Any relationship you will get in will end. Any job you have will end as well. Any physical possession you have will go. You will die. Your friends will die. Your family will die. And it's important then to appreciate everything as it is at the moment, and to appreciate, you know, where we are in the cycle of that birth, death, and rebirth.
And can I ask you a somewhat uncomfortable question, potentially?
Let's go. Go, please.
During that period of time where you know the next 6 months of your life might be the last. And not to pull you
Mm.
into a really dark time. But
No. Yeah, that's.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you obviously had to think about death a lot. And
Mm-hmm.
what was the path you took on that thought process? What was the jump? Did you return to God? Did you look down? What path did you take?
I'm actually so happy that you brought this back up, because I forgot to tell a part of the story as well that sometimes I tell around this, that I had an out of body experience. I had a near death experience in 2016. So
Okay.
because like I love my work, right, and I really identified very heavily with my work, and I'm a graphic designer, photographer, all these other things as well as videography. And so I'd arranged to meet a friend of mine in a cafe to talk about doing a video for his photo book, right? Because that's what I wanted to do. I was like, screw it. And honestly, as well, Matt, like even right now, if I was, God, I mean, really, God forbid that I am diagnosed with something, but if I was, like, I don't think I'd change anything in my life now. I love my life just the way it is. I don't think that it would change, if there was a Mercedes parked outside, or if I had a 3-bedroom house. Like, I cycle everywhere. I live in rented accommodation, all this kind of stuff. Like, whatever. Like, I absolutely love my life, and I'm actually incredibly grateful that I get to live the way that I do and do what I do for a living. Like, words cannot describe, where I'm at. So, but anyway, so back in 2016, at the time, I was like, fuck it, I'm just gonna like I enjoy doing things, and so I'm just gonna do this video for my friend's photo book. And I was waiting for her there in the cafe, and I was looking around, and I saw people like kind of laughing and joking. And I was like, oh yeah, they're laughing and joking because their deaths are like 20, 30, 40 years away. Because mine felt like it was 6 months away, I felt like that whole experience could have happened without me being there at all. And in fact, like in that moment, I felt like kind of a ghost amongst the living, right? Like these were sentences that were playing out in my head. I felt like I was living on borrowed time, that in fact this whole scene in 6 months' time will be playing out, and I just won't be there because I won't be here anymore. That's how it felt to me. And at the time, I didn't quite realize like what had happened. But now, in hindsight, like looking back, I was like, oh wow, I had a near death experience. Like I had a very embodied feeling of death. Like not just death as like this kind of abstract concept, but like a feeling that like for sure, yeah, like I imagined a version of my reality where I was no longer there. Yeah.
That's not something most people can say. It's...
Well, thankfully as well. Like well, thankfully on whatever, it's live. There's millions of near-death experience stories on YouTube. Now, I didn't quite have like out of body. Like some people, they might get hit by a car or something like that, and they have an experience where like literally they leave their body. They have like a life review. They get to,
meet past relatives, all kinds of things.
Yeah, and maybe even meet angels, meet God, like all this kind of stuff. It's a real experience that happens to people that are having, this near-death experience. I feel like mine was more just kind of like an out of body. Like I felt like, probably very dissociated. I don't know, maybe if my mind was trying to make sense of what was happening, like with all the information that it had available to it. Yeah, certainly. Like, and at the time as well, right? When I was diagnosed in 2014, I was looking around and I was like, okay, this is really bad. Like I've been diagnosed with leukemia, but surely some people have it worse. And, this is, but then as time went on, and certainly when I relapsed before my transplant, and then I had the transplant and I had all kinds of complications, and then relapsing after, in hindsight, I realized like, actually, if anyone gets diagnosed with chronic myeloid leukemia, certainly they don't want to be in blast crisis. Certainly they don't want to relapse before having a bone marrow transplant. Certainly they don't want to relapse after having a bone marrow transplant. And I would imagine that if you took my journey and described it to a doctor and said like, hey, what are the odds of prognosis here? Like, I think my chance of survival is probably quite slim. And so again, like every day, I'm incredibly grateful. Like each morning, when I wake up, I say it's another day in paradise to everyone that I meet. I tell them it's another day in paradise, and not by, I don't know, I'm not trying to annoy people. It's just like
just authentically living your experience. It's what you're
100%. Yeah. And some people then they shoot back. They're like, no, it's not another day in paradise for me. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, live in that world, because for me, this is another day in paradise. Breathing in and out feels so good. Walking without pain. Oh my God. Like seeing out both my eyes, listening through both my ears. like I'm able to eat and taste and enjoy food, like, wow, I'm living in heaven, you know? Yeah, anyway, thanks for listening.
It is that clear example of the choice you have when you wake up, because those people that reply with, oh, it's not a day in paradise for me, it's the perspective they're living, where they are deciding that their life sucks, maybe.
And it does, right? As in, there are aspects of your life that do suck, that are difficult, that are painful. Like, yeah, maybe you've lost somebody, maybe you have an illness, maybe you have a chronic illness, maybe your kid has a chronic illness, maybe you have issues at work, maybe you're stuck in a job you don't like. And that sucks. Yeah. And it's also extremely fertile ground, from where it's very possible to find meaning, find purpose, and find joy. And it's everywhere. It's so abundant, actually. It's yeah. And all that it requires, in my opinion, is maybe a change of perspective or like an additional perspective.
There's a podcast that I'm obviously very inspired by my format and what I like doing, the old Modern Wisdom. There was a discussion Mr. Williamson was having with somebody, and I can't recall who it was, but it's somebody who specializes and their whole focus of career is on the science of gratitude. And the discussion was actually around some people feeling shame or feeling less than important when they find gratitude in small things. Like, oh, how terrible is the quality of my life that I'm grateful that I've been able to stand on the grass in my back garden. And it's like they miss the whole point of gratitude. You're like, it doesn't need to be these huge things, like as you said, a Mercedes and some fancy house and all that stuff on the back. You being able to find gratitude from your first breath in the morning and being able to hear sounds is beautiful. And it's the perfect human experience, if there is such a thing. Because you're walking around happy and embodied in the gratitude of being alive.
For sure. And I think maybe this is maybe a nice point to end on, where like in the past, maybe my engine used to run on anger, actually. I used to, like, when I was in my early 20s, I used to be like, I'm going to show them, I'm going to be successful, I'm going to work. And so then when I got cancer, I was like, woof, well, what now? And now I just have to focus on my recovery. And now up until, very recently and still, gratitude is like a huge part of my journey. And I find like, my engine runs on gratitude now. But recently I've had a moment as well where I believe, like, and again, maybe this is more of a spiritual conversation or something we can have more in the future, but there's a word like called grace, so I've had this experience of grace. And actually you talk about shame as well, which is very interesting, because recently, and I went through an experience. I went through actually a breakup, and I experienced shame about aspects of like how I behaved during the relationship. And then at the same time, like, I had friends come to support me, and I couldn't, like, I like, gratitude doesn't quite cover the feeling for being ashamed of myself, and then actually having people come out of the woodwork to support me. And part of my thinking is like, well, how can they support me when I'm the bad guy? Like, I've done wrong. And at the same time, like, making mistakes, and as I said, like, kind of, being human is part of the human experience. And so then when I had friends that came out to me, I was just overwhelmed by a feeling of grace that, like, actually, like, because I was also being true to myself, right? In no parts of the relationship or the breakup did I not show up as myself. I showed up with integrity. I showed up in a way where, sure, I made mistakes, and at the same time, I owned those mistakes. I tried to do my best on every front, and it does take two. And so, in the end, the relationship ended, and it wasn't my decision. And at the same time, I felt this incredible feeling of grace from friends of mine that came to support me at a time and a moment that I couldn't really understand or understand why they would. And so now, like, for me, that goes even one level further than gratitude, actually. And so it's an experience that's still actually quite new to me. And like, because actually once upon a time, well, maybe about a year and a half ago, I went to New Zealand, and I spent time there just backpacking, just like couch surfing and hitchhiking around the country. And at one point I wound up in a farm, 2,000 acre farm, sheep, cows and stuff like that, helping out. And I was scraping paint off a shed, just I loved it. Like, it was a lot of fun. And I was having these quite beautiful conversations with the elderly owners of the farm, this lady, the wife. And she said to me as well at that point, she said that like grace can actually be hard to receive, right? And it's true, because when it comes, like, there's often a feeling like as a human, right? Like as in if something really amazing happens to me or for me, like, do I deserve it, right? And am I worthy? Am I worthy of love? Am I worthy of people caring about me? When I've shown evidence that perhaps I'm not worthy, right? Because I made mistakes, right? And so that's the thing. People showing love to me, when I wasn't perfect, was that intense, like gave me that intense feeling of grace, and it's incredibly beautiful. So yeah, just wanted to speak to that. So
it sounds
and
like
I think you were part of that as
spiritual.
well, man. Yeah, you were part of that. Like just people coming and showing up and being like, well, like how are you? How are things? How are you doing? Like and even just checking in, and then me saying, look, like I did these things and I made these mistakes and I'm really not proud of myself. And for people to come back and say, look, that's okay, like, so yeah. It was very special, very meaningful, very beautiful. So.
Well, from my perspective of giving you the support that you felt during those interactions, you were becoming a closer and closer friend of mine, and all I could see was somebody that had done wrong, could see the wrong that he had done, was acknowledging it and was standing to his own integrity and morals, and just needed a little bit of checking in on. You deserved it. You are a wonderful human, and you know that. I think you always know that, even when things are tough. But it's magic for you to be able to acknowledge that and see a lesson that maybe you didn't hear a year and a half ago from this lady on the farm in New Zealand. But that in that moment in your life went, that's that difficulty in receiving grace she was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So I've had my recent return to faith and Christianity and all of that, and I can't help but have a feeling of like, maybe that message was given at the time where you can hear it then and actually receive it now.
Oh, okay. I know I said I was going to end on that point, but maybe there's a really beautiful quote from Rilke where he talks about loving the questions.
Okay,
I think you'll like this too. He says, be patient towards all that is unsolved in your heart and try to love the questions themselves, like locked rooms and like books that are now written in a very foreign tongue. Do not now seek the answers which cannot be given you because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer. And yeah, to me, what that speaks to is like maybe, this version of me that I could have gone to my younger self and been like, hey, Cian, here's all the answers, right? Here's everything you need to know. There's no way of living that. There's no way of embodying that without going through the experience. So we have to go through the experience. And then maybe, we get to live into the answer. So yeah.
I was going to ask you for like a final takeaway that somebody that listens to the end of this can get, but I don't think I can ask you for a better one than that. That closes it perfectly.
Yeah, there we go. Well,
so the closing of all of this we need to talk conversation is a little bit more logistical because, well, a little bit of that, a little bit of just a moment of gratitude to you for coming on this, a moment of gratitude for you being authentic and opening up about some really difficult areas to talk. Like, we discussed this before we jumped on, that you've not discussed your cancer journey a lot and in this kind of openness. And I hope that from the understanding I've got from this, everyone's experience of that is very different. But as I always lead to with conversations, this conversation might be medicine for somebody that's going through that, or somebody that has somebody going through that and is experiencing it to understand your perspective. So fingers crossed, touching wood, that's going to help somebody. So thank you for bringing everything you brought to the table. Is there anything somebody is listening needs to know about what's coming up for you in the coming weeks, new year, where they can work with you, reach out to you, anything like that?
Well, yeah, certainly. I think I can leave maybe my Cara Connect link down below if anyone wants to book a session with me. My work is on Instagram at Ciantastic, and I always welcome as well for people to reach out. If it's through DM, if it's through email, or I'm sure you can get my details as well from Matt. And Matt, I'm happy to share them more or less with anybody. Well, yeah, it's a journey. We're going to see where it goes, and yeah, I look forward to again, improving on all the different areas of my life and experiencing the journey that life has to offer.
Magic. It's always an absolute delight to talk to you again, and I will talk to you again really soon. Thank you for coming on.
Mine. Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.